Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Pony. I'm the Customer Experience Officer for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up is a part of the Info Exchange Group. Info Exchange is a not-for-profit social enterprise that has delivered technology for social justice for over 25 years. With over 100 staff across Australia and New Zealand, we tackle the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. I would like to welcome you to the webinar Digital Marketing for Nonprofits, Getting Started with Google Analytics, which will be presented by Tim Brack from Leafcutters. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel, and I will be able to assist you. If you have any questions during the session, please also type it into the questions box, and Tim will answer them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you are on Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience possible. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you shortly after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'll also like to remind you that there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. We would appreciate if you took a few minutes to provide us with some feedback. That's all from me, so I'll pass it over to Tim to get things started.
Super. Thanks very much, Pony, and thanks everyone for joining us for today's webinar on getting started with Google Analytics. So just a little bit of kind of background first. So I work with Leafcutter, which is an organization. We help nonprofits as a technology partner, covering off things like websites, platforms, analytics, digital marketing campaigns, and the like. So if you have any kind of questions after the event, feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is just events@leafcutter.com.au. Otherwise, let's get to the content. So with Google Analytics, there's always this kind of question that we have kind of first, like why do we even have it? Like what's the point? Because we can get these reports that appear impressive and that show these kind of numbers, but what are we actually doing with it in the first place? Because it can just absorb a lot of time if we're not careful. And Google Analytics itself is a website analytics tool. There are others out there that do that. It's essentially telling you what's happening on your website, what sort of activity is there. Google Analytics being the main player in the kind of space, mainly because it's free. So that's always a good option to kind of go for. So a whole bunch of different reasons why we might use it one could be reporting on campaigns. Where did our traffic come from, and what did that traffic do when they came to the website? Did they do the thing that I wanted them to do or not? And if they left, like why, or at what stage on the website did they leave? Another question might be reporting on content, like what did people actually look at on our website, especially for putting all this effort to go into, say, a blog or other kind of content resources. It could be information-based, it could be, depending on your organization, could be medical content, whatever it is that you're kind of writing about, did anyone look at it at all? And then hopefully if they did, was there an impact that we had out of that, or how much of the content did they actually read? Another question might be reporting on conversions. Did people do, again, that thing? Like, what's the outcome of all this website activity? So when we're asking all these different types of questions, and there's obviously a huge number of other questions we could ask, where we look in the interface is going to change depending on the kind of questions we ask. And that's kind of what we'll talk a bit about today, and we'll go through a few of the default reports that are in there, and just hopefully get you a little bit more familiar with Google Analytics and the type of information that it stores in the interface. So ideally, what we're going to do with all these kind of numbers, ideally we're optimizing our website, improving our content, doing better campaigns, essentially getting better return on the time that we invest, especially if it's content, and the money if we're spending money on campaigns. And that's maybe there's like a process that you'd have, like collect data, analyze, insights and action. That's ideal world. So that's all kind of unicorns and rainbows. And very few organizations have this fantastic system, because a lot of the time website analytics is this just kind of added on at the end. It's like, oh no, that's not an urgent, critical part of my job, and so I'm going to do all the things that are catching fire every day, or things that are really, really urgent. So realistically, I think a lot of people are stuck in this place of reporting for the sake of it, or reporting where there's no kind of outcome, like we're not changing anything, or just not reporting at all. It's okay, we'll just kind of leave it, and maybe look at it kind of another time. And while that's the kind of reality, it's not the best position to be in. And so, but I can understand why that's the case. Again, that kind of sense of urgency when we have so many conflicting things we have to do, and time is very short. I think the first step is just understanding what is in Google Analytics, and then that helps you understand, okay, what questions can I ask and where can I go for that answer as quickly as possible, not spending a huge amount of time trying to figure out, okay, which report might tell me this and what do these numbers even mean at the end of it. So with Google Analytics, through this kind of stuff, but for everyone that's kind of listening, obviously you can see the slides now, so you'll be able to kind of go back through some of them. That wasn't really the most important content, but we're coming to it. Okay, so here we go. So the data and information in Google Analytics, it really comes down to three things. Who's coming to your website? Not literally who. It's not like, Jeff, who's over there, coming to your website. It's kind of anonymized information that's in there. And part of Google's terms of use is it has to be anonymized information that's kind of in the system. So it might be, the number of people, the location they're in, and a lot of the kind of technology breakdown as well. I'll show a couple of those reports in a moment, just kind of what we can see. The second one is how do people kind of get to the website? So that's, the campaigns they come from, the links they kind of follow, is it organic search or paid search or social or, email, like how do they actually get to your website? And then the third one is what do they do? So that's kind of the behavior of when they come to the website. So that's things like, the pages they visit and the other actions they might perform if there's like a goal, a conversion, and I'll talk about conversions in a moment as well, or if there's a donation or a transaction as well. So that's kind of the three buckets that we see in Google Analytics. And the kind of really kind of rough breakdown is if you're in Google Analytics and you're looking at that list of reports on the left-hand side, is the who is the audience reports, the how do they get there is acquisition. Now, acquisition is not customer or donor acquisition. Acquisition is just traffic. How do we get traffic to the website? And then what do they do is behavior and conversions, and kind of split across those. Now, this is just kind of like a rough breakdown. You get some of the information kind of crossing over different areas, and I'll show you that in a moment. One important point with conversions, that's kind of the only set of reports that doesn't automatically populate. It's where you have to tell Google Analytics, okay, if people look at this page, then the conversion has happened. And quite often that'll be if they fill in a form, and after they fill in that form, whatever form it is, it could be a contact form or it could be a appeal form, whatever it might be, then there might be a thank you page after that form. And so it's okay when they view that thank you page, that means the goal has been achieved. So that's where we have behavior and conversions kind of separated out. So what we have then is a whole bunch of default reports. And if you've logged into Google Analytics, you'll kind of see them. And that's kind of the tricky part I find with a lot of people is just, okay, what of the 40 reports should I actually look at? Because I have hundreds of metrics, hundreds of dimensions, I'll explain those in a moment, across all these different reports. And if I don't know where to start, then yeah, it's super overwhelming. So I'm actually just going to go through a few of those different kind of areas and just kind of point out a few that I normally use. Now, because I normally use them doesn't mean that that's the best thing for you. It kind of depends on the questions that you have for the website and for the data that you're collecting. But this could just be ones where, hey, maybe check these ones out, see if they're useful, and if they're not, obviously see what else is kind of in the system. So I'm just going over to Google Analytics. There is actually an account in Google Analytics called the demo account. And so the demo account is one where we can play around with Google Analytics and see what's kind of happening. So it's like a test account that actually runs on a real website. You can get access to it just by searching for Google Analytics demo account, and it will just connect it into however you log into Google Analytics. You'll just have like a new account in your list of accounts. So inside here, we'll always land on the homepage, or a lot of time we'll kind of land on the homepage, and that's relatively new. I think it was like a year and a half ago that Google added this. Before, it was just kind of dropping people into one of the other reports. It's just like a dashboard. Again, maybe the number you need or maybe what you need to check is in that report. I don't typically use this one because normally the questions I have are quite specific, so I'll jump into one of the other kind of reporting areas. We can see here on the left-hand side, so I've got my real-time reports and then that audience acquisition behavior conversions. Real-time, by the way, is just the last 30 minutes who's been to the website. It's only that kind of rolling 30-minute period. So if you need to know, like right now, maybe you've just sent out an email and you're like, oh, is anyone coming to my website from the email that I sent right now? You could check real-time reporting. It's a little bit limited, but it is kind of giving that snapshot of what's happening very recently on the website. Otherwise, the other reports, Google says that they kind of update within 48 hours. I find that normally I'll check the reports the next day. If I come in at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, more realistically in the morning, if I'm checking my reports at 9 o'clock, I can see the previous day's activity. And normally it's fairly accurate at that kind of stage. I don't expect too many changes from there. But Google's kind of party line is 48 hours for those reports to update. All right, so audience reports, who's coming to your website? We have the audience overview, which is pretty much, a lot of you might check that one out. And this used to be the homepage of Google Analytics. It's just like a really high level snapshot of how many users and sessions were there on your website. And I'll explain what those two terms mean in a moment. I kind of had a nice little chart and then just some of these kind of metrics kind of just shown there. So things like users and sessions, the number of page views, time and bounce rate on there. And again, I'll kind of chat about a few of these in a moment. If that's kind of useful, that's okay. Again, it's just a really high level summary of within this time period I'm looking at, and that's in the top left here. Within this time period, here's the kind of traffic that occurred. What I kind of like about some of these audience reports is some ones that are kind of data points that aren't really easy to get. So things like demographics and interest groups. Now this kind of data is actually, it's not available by default in Google Analytics. There is a setting in the admin area, and we have a checklist which, if you email us, we'll send you the checklist of how to turn this on, where if you opt in, it'll give you this information. And so some of the demographics is some of the age and gender of the people that come to your website, and the interest I'll speak about in a moment. But with age and gender, the really kind of important point of this is it's not everyone. Google, apart from the fact, it feels like they do, but they don't actually know everyone that's coming to your website. So normally I'm taking this sort of information with a bit of a pinch of salt, that at the moment, in this time period of the last month, they only really know a third or just over a third of the people coming to my website, which maybe that probably is skewing, or that could be skewing that these kind of groups really, really heavily. One of the reasons why they don't know is well, how they collect the information is they might know explicitly the age and gender of someone. So if you sign up for Gmail, you have to put in your date of birth and you have to put in your gender. And they might actually know implicitly. So if a person is going to all these different websites and they fit a certain profile, then Google might know you're that person and might just assign you into a particular age and gender group. So still kind of room for a lot of error there. What I'll normally do with that is just kind of question, does this change any of my assumptions about the people coming to my website and what they do? Does this kind of match up with who I think my audiences are? And I can also check some of these other kind of metrics by age and gender. So when it comes to these age brackets, I can then look in this next report and get a breakdown of like, oh no, here's how much traffic came. And then all the way on the right-hand side, oh, here's how many, if you have a transaction, here's how many transactions you have. You can see on this website, yeah, not very many transactions at all. But we can at least get this kind of breakdown, which otherwise we're not really getting that breakdown in some of the other reports. Again, the Facebook data set is going to be richer in terms of the demographic breakdown, because Facebook is much better at collecting that information, but Google is trying to play catch up on that. The second group is the interest reports, and that's really kind of interesting information because Google being, the search engine with like 90–95% market share, they can connect up that kind of information about, okay, when you start searching for something. And let's say if I am suddenly in the market for a car, like I'm like, okay, I want to buy maybe a secondhand car, a new car, and I'll start searching for reviews and comparisons and pricing. Google will see that activity and then it'll be like, oh, this person is in the market for a car. And so it will plop me into one of these in-market segments, in the market for for a vehicle. And as you can see, there's like another 528 that aren't in this list that I'm seeing. There's going to be a lot of overlap, like one person will exist in multiple lists. But again, we can just kind of see, okay, well, I can see the number of users and sessions, but also then the efficiency of that audience. So when it comes to things like my bounces or my time on site, and again, I'll explain more about those in a moment. And then of course, my transactions and conversion rates as well. So it just gives us a little bit more context about the traffic coming to our site. From a data privacy point of view, it's a little bit creepy. From a marketing point of view, okay, sometimes that's useful information. I might then use that to help target advertising segments if I'm doing a lot of campaign work, and I might prioritize ones over others. It just kind of depends what you kind of need out of what your objectives for your websites are. But that's kind of, I guess, two of the reports that are a little less obvious in this bunch of audience reports. Ones that are kind of a bit more obvious, geography, geo kind of breakdown of location, which is going to be country, then region, which is states and territories in Australia. It does have a city report, which again is just going to cluster kind of around the state capitals, but it does kind of get down to that kind of level. Once you kind of go down below city, like postcode, it doesn't really have in Google Analytics, whereas other systems might be able to report that. And again, if you kind of need like really specific geographical reporting, Google Analytics just doesn't collect that data in these reports. You might need kind of another solution to add on there as well. Other ones are kind of technology and mobile. So technology is that kind of technology breakdown. So things like browsers and operating systems. These reports, by the way, are not things that you would need to check every week, because the browsers of people coming to your website, that's not going to change dramatically week on week. It does kind of matter in that time scale. You might want to check in each quarter or every 6 months. And the reason why this becomes important from a marketing or campaign point of view is just where you're trying to spot problems. So if I'm kind of looking at this report and I see that, okay, yeah, we don't have many users on Firefox, but maybe there's kind of a problem and the bounce rate is a lot higher than it is on other kind of devices. So it might mean that my website is rendering strangely, or there's some sort of technical glitch that happens on those browsers. Because web developers, they don't necessarily build the website totally standards compliant across all browsers, and it works perfectly across the board. So at least this report gives us that kind of breakdown. So we might be able to spot a problem. A lot of the time, the problems might be with Edge, which is Microsoft's newish browser, because Internet Explorer is kind of on the way out. But at least here, again, we kind of get that breakdown. And similarly, the mobile one is also really useful just to see, which is that first kind of top level breakdown of what type of device are people using, how does it split between tablet, mobile, and desktop. For a lot of you, it will probably be a more even split than desktop being 70% of the traffic to this website, which is actually really, really high when you think about it. A lot of clients we kind of work with, it might be a much closer 50-50, or it might be mobile a little bit more. But that really depends on the type of audience you have, when you're pushing out campaigns to get to the website, and how they normally engage with you. So that split really differs depending on the organization. And again, just kind of being able to see, okay, here's how much traffic comes in, here's what that traffic's doing on the website, and just being like, oh, cool. So my desktop bounce rate is much lower, probably 15% lower than my mobile bounce rate, even though it looks like it's 6%. The kind of percentile difference will be a lot higher. And then, okay, how efficient is each of those groups? Because even though mobile was a lot smaller amount of traffic, it actually had more transactions. And if I scroll all the way to the edge of the page, I see that my conversion rate, while really, really low for this website, is still much higher than desktop. And I found that's really fascinating, because there's like a clear kind of difference between these two experiences going on. And normally I'd expect it to be the other way around, because mobile here is 28%, 29% of the traffic, but it's 62% of the revenue. And that's an interesting kind of difference. And when I've checked this particular website over time, like previously it was flipped the other way, where again, heaps more even kind of split of traffic, but desktop was just leading with the revenue numbers. All right, so if we want to investigate ways to optimize our website, we can start looking at some of these kind of numbers and looking at where there might be problems in our experience. And that's kind of what the audience reports are. You know, it's kind of roll up of people coming to a website. We've got these demographics and interest groups we can start to look into, as well as the overview of report. But a lot of times that's not the most important thing. You know, I might check into it every now and again, but that's not what I'd need a lot, because I might be doing campaigns, I might be doing content, and that's not really reflected in those audience reports. By the way, one report that is new, I can't open it here because I don't, the permissions for this report is locked in this account, but it should work on your own website, is cross-device. That's the problem of people using multiple devices, which we all do, to look at the same website. And Google Analytics can't normally report on that. So Google is experimenting with a few ways of just kind of showing that in a report, where the same person, in inverted commas, might be looking at the same website on a mobile device and at a desktop. It's like, okay, well, what does that look like? Is it 20% of the people? Is it 4%? Is it 80%? You know, what does it look like when we're looking at Venn diagrams of device types? All right, so the second group of reports, and this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting, is acquisition, which is how we get traffic to our website. Now, there's less kind of groupings in here, and really we're kind of looking at one main group, which is just all the traffic to my website. With the other ones, you know, if you're using Google Ads for search or display or YouTube advertising, that can appear here. You can connect Google Ads and Google Analytics, and so all the reports can populate inside this one tab. If you have Google Search Console enabled, so if you care about how your website performs in organic search, so quote unquote free SEO type stuff, then Search Console is the tool for you, and you can connect Google Analytics and Google Search Console. Again, we have a couple of these points in a checklist that we can send out if you email us. Then this is where you can see some of that data. So really, really useful to have in one interface. Social, I don't tend to actually use that much, and not a lot of other people I know do use this group of reports. I'm not saying I don't use social that much, I'm saying that this set of reports, because normally I'm getting the same data out of all traffic. But again, check it out, see if it's kind of useful for you. And then a campaign one as well, just kind of grouping the campaigns together across the different channels. But a lot of the time I'm playing around in all traffic. So I just want to see these kind of groupings together and see the traffic coming to my website. And so here I have a few kind of splits, like looking at my all traffic by a channel. And a channel is just this really high level grouping of the traffic that comes to your website. So organic search, paid search, for example, as two kind of groups here. Social, referral, and then I can click on and go into more detail on a few of these kind of groupings. Like social, I can see, oh, well, which social was it? And here it's mainly going to be YouTube, where it should be. Oh no, Twitter. Okay, it's changed. So Twitter and YouTube for this website, which is the Google store. Okay, so then I can go a little bit further and just kind of see a bit more detail. But now I have this kind of breakdown. I can see how much traffic comes from this social network. And again, those same kind of metrics keep popping up. How much traffic comes, how efficient is it, like how engaged is it on the website, and then does it convert at all? And that's kind of really interesting when you see differences in bounce rate of like 65% to 95%. Always keeping in mind that the sample size is quite different here, but something's kind of going on. And so you might be thinking that if you're seeing this kind of really big difference, you might be like, oh man, maybe I just want more of this traffic that's actually doing quite well and checking the conversions too. And this traffic that's just disappearing straight away, that kind of feels like there's a bit of a problem with that 95 or 99% bounce rate. So I might kind of investigate what's happening with that traffic. All right, so that's how I'm going to use my acquisition reports. Again, with a lot of these reports, the really useful thing with some of these default reports is seeing these three kind of groupings of metrics. I have this acquisition group. So again, that's these really high level of numbers, users and sessions. I have the next kind of group, oops, sorry, my screen size is a bit wonky there, which is behavior. So, and that's my bounce rate, pages per session, and how long people are on the website. And again, I'll go into these in a moment. And then I have conversions all the way on the end there. And that's going to be e-commerce, or it can be the specific goals I've set up. By the way, e-commerce, the vast majority of websites are not e-commerce. They don't have transaction capability. And so it totally, like if that's you and you're like, oh, I don't collect money, therefore it's not relevant. Well, we can have other goals as well. And it can be anything really. A conversion can be whatever is useful for your organization. It could just be signing up to a newsletter. And if that's useful for you to see in this report, that's totally fine. There's no rule around what a conversion has to be. It's really, really contextual to your organization and your website. All right, so another kind of group then is after we're getting this kind of traffic and we can see what it's doing on the website, see like a kind of breakdown. I looked at the channels report, which is this kind of big macro grouping. And then maybe I want to get into like really, really detailed information. And I'm going to look at all the traffic and source and medium. So this is now the most detailed kind of view of the traffic coming to my website. And so we'll see on this page, I'm only looking at 10 rows of information, but I've got another 93 rows that are available in this report, all the way down in the bottom right. And again, I get this really specific kind of breakdown of traffic, and I can see how much of it comes to my website, what does it do in terms of engagement, and then does it do the thing I want them to do, which is do the goals or do the purchases, whatever it is. I still want to keep that in mind, because there's not much point having a really, really low bounce rate if all that traffic is not converting as well. I kind of want this balance between, yeah, they're engaged and they're also doing the thing I want them to do. For a lot of you, the point of the traffic is not just they came to the website and they looked at more than one page. The point is normally it's a bit deeper than that. It's like, okay, I might have an advocacy action I want them to do. I might have an appeal or a fundraising campaign or a peer-to-peer campaign, whatever it is you're kind of doing at the moment. There's an outcome that you're looking to generate. And some of the conversions you'll have might be, inverted commas, a bit softer. They might be, like maybe sign up to a newsletter. And some of them might be harder and harder to achieve, like actually get a donation through. And that's like, okay, that's the big goal versus like maybe a little goal. So macro and micro conversions. And that's normally something that we'd look to set up. So when we're setting up Google Analytics, we can define these different types of goals and just make sure we're recording all this different data in our reports. And then we can look at the performance based on, all right, well, for this traffic, this organic search traffic coming from Google, how many registrations did I get? Or how many engaged users did I have? Whatever it is, we can kind of define those as well. All right, so we have our acquisition. Then we have the kind of, I guess, for any people interested in the kind of content side, now we have the more interesting kind of part of, all right, so they came to my website, now what? And inside this set of reports for behavior, we have behavior related to content, behavior related to site speed. Don't need to check that all the time. Again, that's like a really technical set of reports around how long does it take your website to load, which is a really important kind of factor. If your website is taking 4, 5, 6, 7 plus seconds, people are just dropping off it because it, especially on a mobile, they're not going to be super patient to wait around. And you can't have a website that's fast, that's too fast. That doesn't exist. But you have effort that is too much effort to put into speeding it up. And I understand that. So at least you can get some visibility on the speed. And you might actually highlight in that report, you might be like, oh, actually, I've got these 4 pages and they are way slower than the average for my site. So maybe the images are too big or there's other technical issues with those pages, which at least these reports will identify. Site search, that relates to internal site search on your website. So if you kind of go, there's a search box on your website and you want to actually capture, well, what are people searching for when they come to my website? That can be really interesting information for understanding, okay, if there's a problem in the navigation or people don't know where they go, they might default back to a search. And so you can at least see what are they actually searching for. Events is not like parties and stuff. It's Google Analytics events, which are interactions that aren't a page view. So normally when we're looking at these reports, and especially the site content, that's all about the pages on the website. Events might be other actions you want to measure that aren't a page. If you think about someone clicking on a link to download a PDF, well, the PDF, it's not trackable. You can't track them downloading that, opening that PDF as a page view because there's no JavaScript that loads at that time. So in that case, we might track it as an event, like the clicking on the link to the PDF, that's what we're going to measure, and we'll do that as an event. All right, within site content, all pages, as the name suggests, here's all the pages on your website, how often they're viewed, or how many times they're kind of viewed, both the raw kind of number and then uniquely, and I'll explain that in a moment. And a couple of other metrics like the entrances, which is, okay, how many times was this the first page someone looked at at the website? And then the exit, which is, okay, how often was this the last page they looked at? We have this kind of this big breakdown there. Another one I do like looking at is the landing page report. And this report tells me when this is the first page that someone looks at, here's what happens. And so when this homepage is the first page, all right, there was 42,000 visits where they started on the homepage. And when they started on the homepage, almost half of them bounced off, which means they only looked at that one page, which is not necessarily great, but it's hard to know if that's good or not, because maybe it's a big improvement for them. We don't know. And then kind of what else kind of happens. So here's my goal conversion rate when people started on the homepage. You can see obviously a lot higher than this kind of second page there. So this is, I like that kind of report just to get a sense of, okay, when the journey starts here, here's what happens. And I might then compare some of my pages together, like what happens when they, and this is a store, but what happens if they land on this shop, which is men's apparel versus maybe I have ladies apparel, or here I have a specific category of product. And I might compare the differences between these two groups and then decide on, oh, here's a change I could do to improve that result. Go make the change, see if it improves or not, if my bounce rate improves or other metrics improve. All right, so the last set of reports then is the other conversion reports. Two types of conversions we can have in Google Analytics: a goal, which is like a catch-all for anything that's not an e-commerce transaction, and then e-commerce, which are the transactions. And you'll kind of see a lot of references, checkout and shopping and products. It's not, by no means can you not capture donations or fundraising actions. That's totally fine in this setup. It's just that Google Analytics skews more towards commercial than it does to nonprofit. Because if you think about the tool, this tool has to apply to everybody. It's one tool for hundreds of millions of websites to use. I don't know if it's quite that hard, but it's at least tens and tens of millions. So if it's one tool for absolutely everybody, then they've gone, okay, let's kind of go down this kind of road of making it, of using these terms, which they think is the primary audience. All right, so we have this kind of breakdown in e-commerce. I won't really go into that because it gets quite detailed, but with the goals we have, and again, they can be whatever you really want on your website. And I can talk about that more in next week's session. But on this website, they have 5 set up. So I have my overall, how many goals happened, what's my goal conversion rate and an abandonment rate. And then I have things like, okay, here's goal number 1, goal number 2, 3, 4, 5, and here's the labels they've given to them. So for instance, here's one for registrations on the website, and they had 294 within the time period. Okay, so we get kind of a sense of what's happening on the website. So those are the default reports that you have. And that's just the ones that we're going to kind of stick with today. We're not going to go anywhere else. I've got the reports I just kind of spoke about. I do have them listed in the slides, and I believe you'll kind of get a copy of these sent to you. And if not, feel free to get in touch. And these are just kind of the ones I did like a quick overview of to show you what's kind of going on in a few of them. What I just kind of want to quickly talk about then is, how does the system work? Like what is Google Analytics actually doing to get these kind of numbers? And it does, a lot of time it kind of feels like magic because not much seems like it's happening, but obviously technically there's quite a lot behind the scenes which we don't see. And it's all kind of based on JavaScript. So Google Analytics gives you a little bit of code called JavaScript, which you put on your website. And how you get on your website, again, there's heaps of guides that can kind of give you instructions. Kind of depends on what your website's made with, but really the code goes on every page that you want to appear in your reports. And when someone goes to your website, they load the browser that they're using, loads the page, the JavaScript will load, and it's going to send a message over to Google Analytics from that browser on that machine. And that's really how it works, which to me feels, yeah, it's kind of like magic. JavaScript happens, and then we get this data in our reports. And again, we don't need to know the ins and outs of the JavaScript. Obviously, a lot more goes into it, but that's kind of the crux of what's happening. And Google Analytics, there'll be like a cookie in the browser on the machine, and that uniquely identifies that web browser. But again, there's all this kind of stuff that goes on. And that happens on every page. So every page that's tracked, the home page, the about page, the contact page, whatever it is, when that JavaScript loads, in the browser on that page, then that browser will send a message to Google Analytics and say like, oh, hey, page was looked at, here's the page, here's the title tag for that page. And then, within 8 hours, or maybe 48 hours according to Google, that'll just be plopped in the reports that there was another page view happening. And then all that information is aggregated together into this kind of data that we have. Google Analytics tells us what happened after the fact. It doesn't actually ever tell us if it was good or not. So that's kind of often a gap in what we have in understanding. Like, was this a good experience? Well, we don't know. Like, there's no context around that. Like, if the amount of time people spend on the site increases, it's like, is that because maybe we just had more content, or is it because of something else, or is it because the experience got worse? We don't really know. So normally I'll mix in some qualitative feedback as well as just like the quantitative, which is really Google Analytics is solidly quantitative in these reports. A few things in these kind of reports, obviously that they're made of metrics and dimensions, and you're going to see that kind of terminology. So I just thought I'd kind of explain a few things. So this is what the reports are made up of, metrics and dimensions. So a metric is it's a number. You're all kind of aware of what they could be, a conversion rate, or the visits to a website, or the users or sessions. These are numbers that we see. The dimension is describing the data that we're looking at. So it's like a descriptive label. So you could be looking at the visitors that came to your website by country. Now, country is going to be the dimension, because it'll be like Australia, New Zealand, whatever it is, and metrics would be the visitors, because that's the number that we see. And when you're looking at the reports, the metrics are the columns, and the dimension is the row, or rows, because you can have up to 2 there. So columns and rows, metrics, dimensions. With that number then, the metric itself, it's either going to be about scale and volume, or it's going to be about efficiency. And let's see kind of an example of that. So the first example, how many donations were there in December? And the second example, what was the average donation amount in December? So donations, there were 300, 200, 28, whatever it is. That's about a sense of scale. How many of this thing happened? The average donation amount is a question of efficiency, because you might change your giving handles to try and increase the donation amount. Now, you might get the same number of donations, but maybe we can just make this a little bit more efficient, kind of push up the end result by making a few other kind of tweaks. So if I want to improve the outcome, I might play around with scale. I might also play around with efficiency in my website. The dimension, which is describing the data. So if I just have a, again, thing like donations by month, donations is the metric and month is the dimension. And you'll see that in those reports. One thing to kind of watch out for, again, is you're kind of navigating through Google Analytics, and this can easily be missed. At the top of the table, we have the ability to change the dimension we're looking at. So you'll see that it says kind of page just at the top of the table, it's highlighted black, and then the first column title is page as well. But I can change that. And a lot of the reports have the ability to change the dimension. They also have the ability to add a second dimension to the report. So if you think about, if I was looking at a report with country as the first dimension, I could add city to the second dimension. And so I'd have 2 columns, one with countries and the second one with all the cities. So I'd have like Australia, and they'd be like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, blah, 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 blah. Just kind of like list out any kind of country, any city in Australia, list them all out. It makes the report a lot larger, but it gives us a lot more detail in these kind of metrics. All right, so with kind of what we're looking at, the metrics change depending on which report we're in, which kind of makes sense, right? Because it's conveying different information. So some of the audience and acquisition reports will have these columns. And again, I've kind of mentioned that kind of final set there, conversions could be e-commerce, it could be goals. So it kind of breaks into acquisition, behavior, and conversions, which is a nice kind of like nice way to compare things, and a nice kind of grouping of kind of metrics. Some of the behavior reports, well, it's not about the users and sessions. It's about, oh no, here's the content of the website. So in that case, it's about page views, unique page views. And these 2 sets of metrics, that's pretty much 90% of what you're going to see in Google Analytics, and probably what you're going to find most useful on a common basis. So if that's kind of most useful, then I probably thought I should just kind of describe a few of what they actually mean. So a user, A user, it might be, it's kind of all right to think of them as people, or at least it would be the default to be like, oh, here's how many people came to the website. But it's not actually people, because it's actually the web browser itself. So it's like Chrome on my laptop, or Safari on my iPhone. So the first thing you have is like, oh, it overcounts the number of people that come to your website because I'm using two devices, right? So there is a level of inaccuracy, but that's okay because we're getting the sense of what's happening. The exact number is not the most important thing. What I'm trying to do is make sure the trend, like, are we performing better over time, rather than just like, oh, there was 4,000 users in December. That's not the most important thing. That the trend is kind of what we're trying to do. So users is about the browsers, the web browser. It doesn't map exactly to people, because some ad blockers might block Google Analytics as well. So we have kind of some technical limitations there too. A session is just a visit to the website. So that's kind of what we see a lot of time. How many people, in inverted commas, and then the sessions, how many visits were there on the website. You might get one person comes lots of times, one person or one user might come once. So you have that obviously big split between how often they come. So let's say I have two people. So one person comes on their desktop, they come on Monday at 9 a.m. and Tuesday at 10 a.m. Another person comes on their laptop at 3 p.m. The number of users here is 2, because let's assume they use the same browser. I've got 2 machines, so I'd have 2 users. The number of sessions is 3, because I have Monday at 9, Tuesday at 10, Monday at 3, as the 3 in there. And if I added another device and added 2 more sessions, well, now my number of users has gone up to 3, because I've got 3 devices, probably 3 browsers. It's unlikely that someone's going to switch between browsers on device. It could happen, but that's probably an edge case. So I'd have 3 users in this case, and then I've now got 5 sessions, so 5 visits to the website. A session, by the way, stops after, and this is the default, which you can change, but a session will stop after 30 minutes of inactivity. So if someone they don't go to any new pages on your website, they just do whatever, they go make a cup of tea, have some lunch, 40 minutes goes by, they come back to their computer and they click on another link, and that'll start a new session, because it's been 30 minutes of inactivity. So there's a few kind of criteria around when a session ends, but just give you a sense of what's happening. All right, so page views. The number of times, super kind of obvious, a page view is the number of times that page is loaded. Remember, it's all JavaScript based, so it's just, oh, the JavaScript was loaded when the browser looked at that page. A unique page view is now looking at like, okay, well, how many visits to the website, which is a session, was this page loaded? So even if someone looked at it 40 times in one visit, that's going to be 40 page views, but one unique page view. So in this kind of example, I'm going to the home page, then the about page, back to the home page, and then the contact. That home page will have 2 page views, but just one unique page view in that one visit, in that one session, which is a nice metric to actually look at if I have people coming back to the page multiple times. I don't want that to get too noisy. And if I just want to be like, oh no, just show me the visits where people looked at this page, then I would use unique page views as the metric there. Session duration. So this is on average, how long do people spend on the website, which is just the total amount of time divided by how many sessions there were. One of the problems with that metric is that it doesn't include a session that bounces. And I'll explain a bounce in a moment, but the tricky part is that, so when I have these 2 numbers side by side, average session duration and bounce rate, the 46% of traffic that just bounced, they only looked at one page, that's not included in the session duration, which probably pulls that number higher than it would be if it was a really accurate number of how long people spend on the website. It's kind of okay. It's not the end of the world that the numbers are a little bit inaccurate, because they're consistently inaccurate, which sounds kind of crazy. It sounds like a really weird thing to say, but what I mean is, if traffic comes to your website from Facebook and traffic comes to your website from Google, and they both record bounce rate and session duration, well, they're both recording it in the same way. So if there's a difference between, say, Facebook bounces at 80%, Google bounces at 40%, well, it's still a valid observation that there's a big difference there. And you might try to figure out, well, why? Like, what's the traffic doing when they come, and what pages am I sending them to? Okay, so we can still use the information and get insight from what is happening. And so that kind of metric, then that bounce rate, which is also like it's everywhere, it's in all the reports, and people normally ask, what does it mean? But it's just a percentage of visits that had one interaction. And normally the interaction is they looked at one page, and that's kind of what they did. Sometimes one page is okay. Like if I am looking for contact details and I happen to land on the contact details for your website, then I've achieved what I wanted. I got the phone number, I called the organization, that's fine. But sometimes, yeah, we want people to interact with more than one page on our website. So in that case, we're trying to get a higher bounce rate. It's not about people leaving the website straight away. That is not how, time is not in the calculation. But remember that a session ends after 30 minutes of inactivity. So that's the only way that Google knows that someone has bounced, is because it doesn't see the second page view or the second interaction. So if you close your browser, Google doesn't know you've closed your browser. All it knows is it didn't get that second message. And so it's like, oh, okay, this visit, I'm now closing it, and it was a bounce. All right. A really common question, what is a good bounce rate? That is really difficult to answer because it depends on how people get to your website and why they're there. So if I am pushing a lot of Facebook ads, and maybe I'm driving people to like information, like, kind of content marketing kind of stuff, like a resource or maybe a guide to something, then maybe people, like, they're on the bus, they come to the page, they read it, and then they just close the browser or go back to Facebook. In that case, they're going to bounce. But that's okay. It still might be okay. So I understand the reason for the question, like a good bounce rate. It's because people want context, and it's easy to understand what's going on if I know, like, is this good or is this bad? The best kind of context you have is actually in your own reports, and that's where you're kind of comparing, like, okay, well, how do my different channels compare to each other? So if I see a bounce rate of 53% versus 35%, okay, there's something kind of going on between these two channels, and maybe one is more engaged than another, and that's a good conclusion to kind of draw out of it. But at least, we can kind of see what's going down in these reports. Normally the site average, so if you look at your bounce rate for your entire website, normally that metric is not useful because it ignores the channels of how people get to your website. It ignores maybe like what content are they landing on and what are they trying to do. And normally I'm trying to drill just that one level deeper to get that context, and then I can be like, okay, this is kind of good or this is bad, or let's kind of improve this and see if we can improve that number. All right. With some of these kind of metrics, there's obviously, you'll see a whole bunch more inside Google Analytics. There's two ways you can find what they mean, like a definition. The first is to search for it. And the second one is actually in the interface. So when you're in Google Analytics, when you're looking at a lot of these kind of numbers, sometimes if you just hover over the name, it'll tell you. It's like, here's the definition. Another way is there's like a little question mark at the top. And then if you have like tables of information, there'll be a little question mark next to the column heading where you can just hover over that, and it'll tell you, like, here's how we define this number or this metric. Okay, so I just want to finish up on a couple of things. If you're kind of having a lot of problems with Google Analytics or tag management, which is that they kind of go together, we can help with that. So setup configuration, auditing, management, and then the things I really like doing is just training and coaching people to kind of take it over and help themselves. And data visualization and kind of dashboarding is another service that we add for this as well. All right, closing thoughts before questions. Highly recommend just going through Google Analytics, just check out the reports at least once. Just kind of click on all the links. You can't, unless you're in the admin area of Google Analytics, you can't actually break anything. Like, all the data is read-only. You're not going to kind of wreck it. So just kind of go through, click on everything and see what happens. See how that changes the report and if any of that information is useful. Because you're going to find half the time it's not actually useful data on like a weekly basis or even a monthly basis. And that's okay, because you're just zeroing on what's going to be useful for you in your role. The question, so what, is really, really important. It's like, okay, well, bounce rate from Facebook is 40% higher than from Google. Okay, well, so what? Like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What do we need to change anything? Because maybe it's like, no, we don't need to change anything because that traffic is coming for a very different purpose than the search traffic. So always asking that kind of so what question after we get that information. Google Analytics works best when you set up conversions. So when you have goals set up in the interface, it just makes the reporting so much easier, because otherwise you don't have this outcome or this objective you're trying to achieve. And we have a part 2 next week where we'll go into a couple more elements of like, campaign tracking or other kind of things. And depending on the questions today, I might kind of tweak some of that content. All right, so I kind of mentioned a checklist a couple of times. Feel free to email us events@leafcutter.com.au. We can send that checklist back, just kind of like a setup checklist of things I normally check or things I'm normally doing when I'm setting up Google Analytics. But otherwise, as Pawny kind of mentioned, we're super open for questions. And I'm just going to click around in here. Okay, and now I open my chat, I think, and just kind of wait for them to come in. All right, and Pawny, maybe you just want to, I'm not sure if you're going to send them over to me one by one or if I can see them. Okay, so the first kind of question I've got is, could you please explain how we get started to access our Google Analytics dashboard, from Angela? Okay, thanks for the question, Angela. So I think if you're kind of meaning with this, if you're meaning through this kind of interface I've been talking about, so Google Analytics itself, the main reason I'm saying that is because there is like a separate tool called the dashboard report, which is up here under customization. If you don't mean that, you just mean the whole thing, that's totally okay. But the first step is to go to analytics.google.com and sign up. And when you create a Google Analytics account, it'll be like, oh, what's the website, what's the organization, and then it'll give you the tracking code. And depending on how your website is set up, kind of changes how you get that tracking code onto your website. So if you're on a Squarespace site or a WordPress site, it's super easy. In fact, most content management systems is actually pretty, it's straightforward in the sense of you don't have to get a developer to spend lots of money to get on your website. So that's kind of okay. But yeah, if you want to kind of reach out and just kind of let me know which website in particular, because normally there's like, if it's WordPress, there's plugins that can help with that. If it's another, like if it's Squarespace or Shopify or anything like that, there's normally just like a setting. It's just asking you, what's the ID number for your Google Analytics tracker? And you just kind of, which you can find in the admin section. Again, that's in our checklist, and that's all you need to do. And then once that tracking code is on the website and it's firing or it's loading when people are on that page, then the reports will start populating. Cool. Okay, so second question from Nicole is, how do events compare to goals as a measure? That's a really good question, Nicole. So with the interactions we have in Google Analytics, I've talked a lot about page views, which is all about content. Another type of interaction is an event. So we have events, and that can be, as I mentioned, like clicking on a PDF to download. Both of these, a page view and an event, can become a goal. And that would just mean that you have a form. After you fill in the form, there's a thank you page. Okay, that thank you page is the goal. Same way that I can have an event, which is someone clicks on this particular PDF, and that one becomes a goal. So both of them can become goals, and both are totally fine. It just depends how your website is set up and what it is that you want to measure, because I can't, if I want to make a goal out of someone downloading a particular PDF report, the best way to do that would be with an event and just turn that event into a goal, which again, from a kind of an admin kind of view is normally a couple steps, but it's not necessarily developer, like you don't necessarily need web developers and extreme kind of costs. Okay, so another question, is it possible to see which demographic or behaviors look at a specific page? It is. So with kind of what we're doing, one tool that I would normally use for that is this kind of panel at the top here. And this is why it's always good just looking at the interface and seeing all the things that are kind of around the place. So where it says all users and segments, I can click on all users and segments, and it opens up this new kind of panel where I can define a group of people that come to the website. And maybe that group is people that come from, Google or part of the demographics, which is right here. And I might be like, oh, cool. So let's say it's women, and it's just like these 3 age groups. And then I might save that as a segment, and it's going to then show me, it's going to recount everything I look at and just have that criteria for this report that I'm looking at. So yeah, you can totally go to the page report, the site content, all pages, create a couple of segments. You can look at a few segments side by side as well. So you can look at up to 4 side by side. And I'll probably touch on that next week as well. But that's, yeah, there's totally a tool for doing that. All right, feel free to add any other questions that we have. Okay, so no other questions at the moment. As I kind of mentioned, events@leafcutter.com.au. If you have any other questions in the future, feel free to send it through. And if you want, again, we've got a setup checklist, so feel free to kind of just send through, and we'll get that out to you as well. Otherwise, Pony, I'll pass back to yourself.
Thank you, Tim, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you have learned a lot from this presentation and we answered all of your questions. If you have any questions that come to your mind later or any feedback about this webinar, please send that through to events@connecting-up or the email that Tim has given you, and we will answer those questions offline. Don't forget that the recording will be available on your website very shortly and a link will be sent to you, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.